High in the Colorado Rockies, 10-year-old Mason Parker lived alone in his grandfather's remote cabin, learning to survive in the wilderness since the old man's passing 3 months ago. The harsh winter had settled in when a desperate pounding at the cabin door pulled him from sleep. Outside, a woman collapsed in the snow, blood staining her coat. A small, terrified girl clutching her hand. The dying woman pressed the child into Mason's reluctant arms, whispering that men had murdered her husband and would kill her daughter to keep their secret. With her final breath, she begged the boy to protect Emma, just 6 years old and now alone in the world except for a mountain child who barely knew how to care for himself. Mason stared at the tiny girl shivering in the doorway, her eyes wide with terror, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on his young shoulders. He had barely managed to survive on his own, living off the skills his grandfather had taught him: hunting small game, chopping firewood, and preserving what little food remained in the cellar. The cabin offered little comfort beyond its sturdy walls and wood stove, a far cry from the life this city girl must have known. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, covering the woman's body in a thin layer of snow as Mason pulled Emma inside and shut the door against the howling darkness. He wrapped her in his grandfather's old wool blanket, her small body trembling not just from cold, but from witnessing horrors no child should endure. "They'll come for us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They always find people." Mason peered through the frost-covered window at the clear trail leading straight to his door. The killers wouldn't need to be skilled trackers to follow it. His grandfather had built hidden storage spaces throughout the cabin, places where he'd stashed emergency supplies, old maps, and a hunting rifle Mason had only fired a handful of times. The boy's mind raced as he considered their options. They could flee deeper into the mountains, but Emma wouldn't survive the journey in this weather. They could hide, but for how long? Or they could stand their ground in the only home Mason had left. As the first light of dawn broke over the snow-capped peaks, Mason made his decision. He would protect this girl, this stranger thrust into his life by a dying woman's plea. Not because he was brave, but because no one else would. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes being a man means doing what's right, especially when it's hardest. In the distance, the faint sound of engines cut through the mountain silence. They were coming. Mason, small for his age but with eyes that held a wisdom beyond his years, struggles with his new responsibility. Emma, with tangled blonde hair and tears frozen on her cheeks, remained silent and withdrawn. The cabin, barely manageable for a boy learning to survive alone, now feels overwhelmingly complicated with another child to care for. Mason awkwardly shares his grandfather's thick wool blankets with Emma while keeping watch by the window. The hunting rifle he barely knows how to use propped beside him. I'm certain that whoever hunted the mother will follow her tracks to his door. The dim light of a single kerosene lamp casts long shadows across the cabin's worn wooden floor as Mason divides their meager breakfast, pushing the larger portion toward Emma, who stares at the food without interest. "You gotta eat," he mumbles, uncomfortable with the silence that has stretched between them since the night before. His words hang in the air, met only with the crackle of the wood stove and the occasional moan of wind through the cabin's chinked log walls. Outside, the snow has started again, heavy flakes erasing the tracks that led to their door, buying them precious time but also trapping them more completely in this isolated outpost. Mason's thoughts drift to the village 15 miles down the mountain, a journey impossible now for a boy and a traumatized 6-year-old in waist-deep snow. He eyes the dwindling stack of firewood by the stove, mentally calculating how long it might last before he'd need to venture outside to chop more. His grandfather had taught him to plan ahead, to think 3 steps forward, but nothing had prepared him for this impossible situation. Emma suddenly speaks, her voice so soft Mason has to lean forward to hear. "They were looking for my daddy's papers, the men in black coats." Her small fingers twist the edge of the blanket. "Daddy said they were bad men who hurt the forest." He had proof. Mason remembers newspaper clippings his grandfather would bring back from town, stories about illegal logging and mining operations destroying protected wilderness areas, stories about whistleblowers who disappeared. He swallows hard, understanding now why the men would pursue a 6-year-old girl across the mountains. Emma might not understand what she knows, but she's witnessed enough to be dangerous to powerful people. The responsibility settles heavier on Mason's narrow shoulders as he realizes they're facing something far more dangerous than the natural threats of the wilderness. He checks the rifle again, though he knows he lacks the strength to handle its powerful recoil properly. In the storage cellar beneath the floorboards, his grandfather kept emergency supplies and an old radio that sometimes worked when the weather cleared. Perhaps there was someone he could reach, someone who would believe two children caught in something too big for them to understand. As darkness falls again, Mason makes a silent promise to the girl who now depends on him. He will find a way to keep her safe, even if he doesn't yet know how. The blizzard intensifies, burying the woman's tracks in the cabin itself. Mason, using skills his grandfather taught him, keeps the fire burning and finds comfort in the knowledge that the storm buys them time. He discovers a small backpack the mother carried, containing few clothes, a worn teddy bear, and a sealed envelope with his name scrawled on it. Emma speaks for the first time, asking for her mother in a voice barely above a whisper. Mason, remembering when he lost his own parents and then his grandfather, finds no words of comfort beyond a shared piece of jerky and an awkward pat on her shoulder. The wind howls outside like a wounded animal, rattling the shutters and sending snow cascading down the chimney to hiss in the flames. Mason adds another log to the stove, careful to conserve their dwindling supply. The storm had been raging for nearly 20 hours now, transforming the world outside into an impenetrable wall of white. In the corner, Emma sits wrapped in blankets, her small face illuminated by the dancing firelight as she clutches the ragged teddy bear from her backpack. Mason turns the envelope over in his hands, wondering how the dying woman had known his name. The paper feels heavy, important somehow. He tears it open carefully, unfolding a handwritten letter and a small flash drive taped to the corner of the page. If you're reading this, the letter begins, "Then I didn't make it to the authorities. My husband, Dr. Thomas Whitaker, documented illegal toxic dumping by Pinnacle Mining Corporation in protected watershed areas. Evidence that would shut down their operation and send people to prison. They killed him 3 days ago. I grabbed what I could of his research and ran with Emma." Mason's eyes widen as he continues reading. The woman, Catherine Whitaker, had been heading to a journalist friend in Denver when Pinnacle's men caught up with them on the mountain road. The flash drive contains all the evidence. Catherine somehow knew of Mason's grandfather, a former environmental ranger who'd been fighting similar battles before his death. She begs Mason to get the drive to a Marshall Williams in the town of Riverdale. "I'm sorry," the letter concludes. "This burden shouldn't fall to a child. But you may be the only chance the truth has now." Mason folds the letter, his mind racing. Riverdale is 30 miles down the mountain, an impossible journey in this weather. Even when the storm breaks, how would 2 children possibly make such a trek with killers searching for them? Emma's soft voice breaks the silence. "My tummy hurts." It's such a normal childish complaint that it startles Mason back to their immediate reality. They haven't eaten a proper meal since yesterday. He rummages through the cabin's stores, finding a can of beans and some dried fruit. As they eat by the fire's warmth, Mason realizes with sudden clarity that he's no longer alone in his grief. This strange little girl with solemn eyes mirrors his own losses. Perhaps in protecting her, he might find a purpose beyond mere survival. Outside, the storm begins to ease, the howling wind subsiding to a gentle moan. Their reprieve is ending. Mason struggles to read the letter by firelight after Emma finally sleeps. His education, limited to his grandfather's teachings, makes the formal writing difficult to understand. Catherine Wilson, the mother, explains how her husband Michael, a federal prosecutor, uncovered evidence against powerful men with government connections. They murdered him and have hunted mother and daughter for months. She chose Mason's cabin deliberately. His grandfather had once saved her father during a mountain rescue, and she remembered stories of this hidden place. The burden feels impossibly heavy on the boy's shoulders as he realizes the girl's danger is real, and he alone stands between her and killers. The yellowed paper trembles in Mason's small hands as he sounds out the unfamiliar words, his lips moving silently. 3 years without proper schooling had left gaps in his reading skills that his grandfather had tried to fill with evening lessons by lantern light. Catherine's handwriting slants across the page in hurried strokes, the desperation evident in how deeply the pen had pressed into the paper. Michael discovered files linking Senator Hargrove and Judge Weston to illegal mining operations destroying protected watersheds. The letter continues. When he prepared to bring charges, they came for him at our home. I grabbed Emma from bed and the files from his safe. Mason glances at the sleeping child, her face finally peaceful after hours of silent tears. Catherine's words paint a terrifying picture of a mother and daughter always running, sleeping in cars and cheap motels, never staying anywhere long enough to be found. Your grandfather, William Parker, pulled my father from a crevasse on Thunder Mountain in 1989. Dad never forgot him or this cabin. When our car crashed on the mountain road, and I knew I was bleeding internally, I remembered his stories about the Parker cabin and the boy who still lived there. Mason swallows hard, trying to process that his isolated existence had been known to strangers, that his sanctuary had been a deliberate destination. The letter mentions a hidden thumb drive sewn into the lining of Emma's teddy bear, containing all the evidence needed to expose the corruption. Catherine begs Mason to get Emma to her uncle in Denver, a journalist named James Wilson who can protect her and release the evidence. The men hunting us have government resources, the letter warns. They'll find her if they can. I'm so sorry to place this burden on you, but there is no one else. Mason sets the letter down, his heart pounding in his chest. He's never been farther than the small trading post 12 miles down the mountain. Denver might as well be the moon. Outside, the storm has begun to subside, the howling wind dropping to an occasional moan. Soon the hunters would be able to continue their pursuit. The old rifle feels impossibly heavy as Mason checks it again, knowing he has only his grandfather's basic shooting lessons to rely on. In the stillness of the cabin, Emma whimpers in her sleep, lost in nightmares Mason can only imagine. He pulls the blanket higher around her shoulders, a fierce and unexpected protectiveness rising in his chest. His grandfather always said that true courage isn't about being fearless, but doing what's right despite your fear. By that measure, Mason has never been more terrified or more determined in his young life. As the storm subsides, Mason and Emma establish an uneasy routine. He teaches her to tend the fire while he checks his grandfather's traps for food. Emma eats little, sleeps fitfully, and watches the forest with frightened eyes. Mason, still learning the skills needed to survive the winter alone, now must share his limited food and knowledge with this silent shadow who follows him everywhere. When checking the perimeter as his grandfather taught him, Mason discovers unfamiliar boot prints in the fresh snow. Someone is watching the cabin. The discovery sends ice through his veins as he crouches to examine the prints, deep and purposeful in the pristine powder, circling from the western approach to within 50 yards of the cabin before retreating back into the dense pines. Adult prints, too large to belong to any forest ranger who might patrol these remote reaches. Mason stands perfectly still, listening to the winter silence broken only by the soft creak of snow-laden branches. The forest feels different now, transformed from sanctuary to threat. He hurries back to the cabin, careful to stay under the cover of trees, scanning for movement among the endless white and green. Inside, Emma sits cross-legged by the stove, her small hands extended toward its warmth. She looks up as he enters, reading his expression with the unnerving perception of a child who has learned to detect danger. "They found us," she says. Not a question, but a flat statement of fact. Mason nods, unwilling to lie. He secures the door, checks the shutters on all windows, and retrieves his grandfather's hunting rifle from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard. The old man had taught him to use it for emergencies, to respect its power, but not to fear it. Now, the wooden stock feels too large in his hands, the metal barrel heavy and awkward. Emma watches him load the rifle with clumsy fingers, then asks in her quiet voice, "Did you ever shoot someone before?" Mason shakes his head. "Only rabbits and squirrels." He doesn't mention that he often missed those targets. Emma nods solemnly. "My daddy had a gun in his desk. He showed me once. Said it was only for bad people, but he never had to use it." Her matter-of-fact tone chills Mason more than tears would have. He remembers his grandfather's words about surviving not just the elements but also predators. Make yourself small. Watch from hiding. Know your ground better than they do. The cabin has advantages, thick logs that bullets cannot easily penetrate, a cellar accessed through a trapdoor covered by the heavy iron stove, and his grandfather's intimate knowledge of the surrounding forest passed down through countless lessons. As darkness falls, Mason positions Emma in the corner, furthest from the windows, wrapped in blankets with emergency supplies packed beside her. He extinguishes all lamps, allowing only the faint glow of embers to illuminate the cabin. In the darkness, he moves between vantage points, peering through tiny gaps in the shutters, listening for any sound that doesn't belong to the night forest. Emma's breathing becomes the rhythm he anchors to, steady and trusting despite everything. Whatever comes with the dawn, Mason realizes he is no longer just fighting for his own survival. A stranger arrives, claiming to be a lost hiker. Despite being only 10, Mason recognizes the lies. The man's clean boots and new equipment betray him. Mason keeps Emma hidden in the root cellar his grandfather built, answering questions with the practiced wariness of a mountain child. After sending the man away with vague directions to the nearest town, Mason's hands shake as he bars the door. That night, he teaches Emma the hiding places and escape routes his grandfather showed him, realizing that his childish skills may be their only chance against professional killers. The knock comes at midday, 3 sharp raps that freeze Mason in place. He moves quickly, lifting the heavy iron lid concealing the root cellar entrance. Emma descends without question, silent as a shadow. Mason adjusts his grandfather's too large sweater and approaches the door, heart hammering against his small ribs. The man stands tall against the winter sky, dressed in expensive outdoor gear that shows no signs of hard travel. His smile never reaches his cold eyes as they sweep over Mason's small frame. "Hello there, son. Got myself turned around in yesterday's storm. Mighty relieved to see smoke from your chimney." Mason keeps one hand on the partially opened door, blocking entry. "No adults here," he says flatly. "My pa's gone hunting. Be back with his rifle real soon." The man's smile tightens. "That right? Well, maybe you could point me toward Silver Creek. My GPS isn't working up here." Mason notes the clean-shaven face and spotless boots. No real hiker would look so fresh after days in the wilderness. "Silver Creek's that way." Mason points west, knowing the actual town lies eastward. "'Bout 15 miles. You'll hit the ranger station first, though." The man studies Mason with new intensity. "Brave kid, up here alone. Haven't seen anyone else pass through. Woman and a little girl, maybe. Woman might have been hurt." Mason feels cold, sweat forming despite the chill. Nobody comes here in winter, just wolves sometimes. He begins closing the door. "Should get to that ranger station before dark. Gets 20 below at night." The man's foot slides forward, not quite blocking the door. "Sure your pa wouldn't mind if I warmed up a bit first?" Pa doesn't like strangers when he's not here. Mason pushes the door firmly shut, slides the heavy wooden bar into place, and watches through a crack as the man lingers before finally turning away. Later, after ensuring the man has truly gone, Mason retrieves Emma. Under darkness, he shows her the loose floorboard leading to a narrow tunnel his grandfather built during his paranoid final years. Emerging 50 yards away beneath a fallen sequoia, "If they come back, if I tell you to run, you crawl through here," he demonstrates. "Follow the creek downhill, don't stop." Emma practices twice, her tiny frame moving through the darkness with determined precision. That night, huddled together beneath wool blankets, Mason realizes childhood has ended for them both. Mason makes a decision no child should have to make. They can't stay at the cabin. He packs what food he can carry and remembers his grandfather's stories about Samuel, an old friend who lives 3 days' hike deeper into the wilderness. Though terrified of the journey, Mason puts on a brave face for Emma, who has begun to look to him for protection despite being just a few years younger. They leave at dawn, Mason using tricks his grandfather taught him to create false trails in the snow. That night, huddled beneath a crude shelter, Emma has her first nightmare. crying for her parents while Mason awkwardly tries to comfort her. The wilderness stretches before them in endless white as Mason shoulders his grandfather's old canvas pack, now stuffed with jerky, dried fruit, matches wrapped in wax paper, and every warm piece of clothing they can layer onto their small bodies. He helps Emma into a pair of his wool socks, pulled up over her jeans and secured with twine to protect against snow that reaches her knees. The cabin vanishes behind them as they follow a nearly invisible game trail winding northwest through dense pines. Mason walks backward periodically, brushing branches across their tracks, then veering in false directions before doubling back, creating a confusing web to slow pursuit. His grandfather's survival lessons echo with each step, teachings he only half paid attention to that now mean everything. Emma walks silently beside him, face buried in her scarf, rarely speaking. "Are we going to die?" she asks once, voice muffled by wool. Mason shakes his head firmly, hiding his own fear. "Samuel has a radio and guns. He was in the army with my grandpa. He'll know what to do." He doesn't mention never having met Samuel, knowing him only through stories of a reclusive man who distrusts authority. By midday, Emma struggles to keep pace, her small body not conditioned for harsh terrain. Mason carries her piggyback through deep drifts, legs burning, stopping often to catch his breath in clouds of vapor. At dusk, he builds a shelter against a rock face, creating a lean-to from pine branches that blocks wind and hides their small fire. They eat sparingly, conserving provisions for days ahead. Emma sits pressed against him for warmth as temperature plummets. In the quiet darkness, grief finally breaks through her shock. She wakes crying, sobbing for her parents until her small body shakes. Mason awkwardly puts his arm around her shoulders, patting her back as his grandfather once did for him. "I know," he whispers, finding no better words for such loss. He tells her about losing his own parents at 5, about coming to live with his grandfather. He explains grief as an older child might explain thunder, naming the frightening thing they share. Eventually, exhaustion claims her, tears subsiding as she sleeps against his shoulder. Mason stays alert, listening to night sounds that once brought comfort, now scanning for any human intrusion into their wilderness refuge. As they struggle through snow that sometimes reaches Mason's waist, he notices Emma watching him, learning how he tests ice on frozen streams, how he finds shelter, how he listens to the mountain. When a snow hare crosses their path, Emma spots it first and points silently. Mason, using his grandfather's small hunting knife, manages to catch it, his first successful hunt without traps. That night, sensing Emma's fear, Mason repeats stories his grandfather told about the mountains, how they protect children who respect them, stories that once comforted him on dark nights. It's the first time Emma falls asleep without tears. The morning brings clearing skies and biting cold that makes their breath crystallize instantly in the air. Mason demonstrates how to recognize weaker snow crusts that might break underfoot, stepping deliberately on drift edges where wind has packed snow more firmly. Emma follows precisely in his footsteps, her concentration absolute as she mimics his movements. They cross a narrow stream, frozen solid except for a thin ribbon of water beneath. Mason shows Emma how to test ice with a stick before trusting it with her weight, how to listen for the hollow sound warning of thin ice. "My grandfather said water is trickier than it looks," he explains, kneeling to scoop snow to melt in his mouth. "Same as people sometimes." Emma nods solemnly, storing this wisdom like precious treasure. By midday, hunger gnaws at their bellies, meager breakfast long since burned away by their journey. Mason scans for tracks, reading stories written in snow. When Emma freezes, hand raised in warning, Mason follows her gaze to where a snowshoe hare sits motionless against white backdrop, nearly invisible except for dark eyes. The animal hasn't noticed them, busy nibbling exposed bark. Mason slowly withdraws his grandfather's hunting knife, motioning for Emma to remain still. With practiced stealth, he circles downwind, knife heavy in hand. His previous hunting attempts mostly ended in frustration, but today something is different. A clarity of purpose steadying his hand. The throw lands perfectly, bringing both relief and strange sadness. Emma approaches as Mason retrieves knife and hair. "You did it," she whispers respectfully. "Will it feed both of us?" Mason nods, feeling suddenly older. "My grandfather showed me how to clean it so nothing goes to waste." That night, sheltered between massive pine roots, they roast meat over a carefully managed fire. The food brings color back to Emma's cheeks. As darkness falls, Mason feels Emma trembling beside him. "My grandfather said these mountains have spirits that watch over children who respect the land." He begins, sharing stories that once soothed his own fears. When lost children walk carefully and take only what they need, the mountain wraps around them like a mother's arms. He continues with tales of forest guardians and brave children finding their way by listening to pine needles. "Do you think it's true?" Emma asks. Mason considers seriously. "I think something here knows us," he answers with surprising certainty. Something watches. For the first time, Emma sleeps without crying, curled trustingly against his side. Mason stays awake longer, listening to night sounds, feeling less alone than since his grandfather died. On the second day, Mason spots men following their trail. Not clumsy hikers, but professionals who move through the wilderness with purpose, carrying rifles with scopes. Despite his fear, Mason remembers his grandfather's lessons about hiding in plain sight. He leads Emma into a narrow ravine, covering them both with pine branches as the men pass just feet away. Emma remains perfectly silent, her small hand gripping his so tightly it hurts. When one man pauses, seeming to sense them, Mason prepares to run, knowing they cannot fight. The man moves on, but Mason now understands they are being hunted by men who will not stop. The men appear first as distant shadows moving against the white landscape, their steady, deliberate progress unmistakable, even from half a mile away. Mason pulls Emma behind a fallen log, his heart hammering as he studies their pursuers through a gap in the deadwood. 3 men in white winter camouflage move in a practiced formation, the leader checking the snow periodically while the others scan the surrounding forest with practiced efficiency. The glint of rifle scopes catches the morning sun as they sweep the terrain. "Not forest rangers," Mason whispers. Though Emma hasn't asked, his grandfather taught him to recognize the difference between those who belonged in the wilderness and those who imposed themselves upon it. These men carry themselves with military precision, their movements economical and purposeful. Mason analyzes their direction with growing dread, realizing they've found the faint trail he thought well hidden. He grasps Emma's shoulders, looking directly into her frightened eyes. "We have to hide now, like rabbits. No sound, no matter what." She nods once, fear sharpening her focus as she follows him in a low crouch toward a narrow ravine cut into the hillside by spring runoff. The depression isn't deep, barely 3 feet at its center, but its edges are softened by fallen pine branches heavy with snow. Mason brushes away their tracks as they enter, pulling branches down to create a ceiling of needles and snow, a fragile shelter that depends entirely on stillness to conceal them. They lie flat on their stomachs, faces pressed into the cold earth as the sounds of the men grow closer. Emma's breathing becomes so shallow Mason can barely detect it. His own pulse thunders in his ears, surely loud enough to give them away. The crunch of boots on snow approaches, stops directly above their hiding place. Through the screen of branches, Mason can see the man's legs, can count the cartridges on his belt. A radio crackles. "Any sign?" a voice asks. Tracks disappeared at the creek. Their hunter responds, his voice unnervingly close. "Kid knows what he's doing. Probably been raised out here." Another voice cuts in. "Remember, we need the girl alive. The drive is likely on her. The boy is expendable." The man above them shifts his weight, snow falling from the branches with the movement. A single flake lands on Emma's cheek, beginning to melt against her warm skin. Mason watches in silent horror as a droplet forms, threatens to run down her face, a movement that might catch the hunter's eye. Emma doesn't blink, doesn't brush it away, understanding with primal instinct that absolute stillness is their only defense. The man pauses, as if sensing something amiss, and kneels. For a terrible moment, Mason is certain they've been discovered. his muscles tense, preparing to spring up, to create a diversion that might give Emma a chance to run. The man reaches down, but only to adjust his bootlace before standing again. "Let's push west," he says finally. They're heading for something, and these tracks are fresh. The footsteps recede gradually, but Mason forces them to remain motionless for what feels like hours until the forest reclaims its natural rhythm of sound. Only then does he release the breath he's been holding, turning to find Emma staring at him with eyes that have aged years in days. They reach Samuel's cabin as the sun sets on the third day. Samuel, a grizzled Vietnam veteran with a permanent scowl and gentle hands, takes one look at the exhausted children and welcomes them without questions. After a hot meal, the first real food they've had in days, Mason explains everything while Emma sleeps. Samuel ruffles Mason's hair, calling him brave as your grandfather ever was. He reveals he's been watching unusual activity in the mountains, men with government credentials asking strange questions. Samuel agrees they can stay, but his eyes hold worry that even a child can read. The cabin appears through the trees like a mirage, smoke curling from its stone chimney into purple dusk. Mason hesitates at the clearing's edge, holding Emma back. She sways slightly, 3 days of hard travel having drained the color from her face. Before Mason can decide whether to approach or observe longer, the cabin door opens, revealing a tall figure against golden lamplight. "You planning to stand there till you freeze, or you coming in?" The voice sounds gruff but not unkind. Mason steps forward cautiously. "Are you Samuel?" "My grandfather was William Parker." The man reveals a lean face with silver hair in a ponytail and a scar running from temple to jaw that pulls his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. His eyes remain sharp and assessing. "Billy Parker's grandson," he states, recognition softening his features. "Heard he passed, wondered what became of you." Noticing Emma's exhaustion, he gestures them inside without further questions. "Neither of you looks like you'd survive another night out there." The cabin welcomes them with warmth and venison stew simmering on a cast-iron stove. Samuel serves them generous portions with thick cornbread. Emma falls asleep halfway through her meal, her small body surrendering to days of exertion. Samuel carries her to a bunk, covering her with a quilt, before rejoining Mason by the fire. "Tell me what brings Billy Parker's boy and a city girl to my doorstep in winter," he says, settling into a creaking chair. Mason explains everything in halting sentences, exhaustion scattering his thoughts like startled birds. He tells about Catherine, the evidence, the men with rifles hunting them. Samuel listens without interruption, weathered hands clasped between his knees. When Mason finishes, Samuel ruffles his hair unexpectedly. "Brave as your grandfather ever was." Billy would be proud. Rising, he moves to a desk cluttered with maps and notebooks. "Been watching strange activity for weeks. Men with government badges asking questions, setting up equipment on the North Ridge. Didn't make sense till now." His expression grows grave. "You can stay, but those men aren't likely to give up." Mason nods, understanding the unspoken message that even here, they aren't truly safe. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we figure out next steps," Samuel adds. Mason wants to stay awake, but his body betrays him. Before sleep claims him, he sees Samuel checking the locks, the old soldier's vigilance never at rest. Weeks pass at Samuel's cabin. Emma slowly emerges from her shell, especially around Samuel's aging German shepherd, Scout. The dog becomes her constant companion, seeming to understand her need for protection. Mason watches Emma transform from a terrified silent shadow to a child who sometimes smiles, feeling a strange pride he doesn't understand. When she starts calling him Mason instead of nothing at all, he feels something shift. No longer just two scared children thrown together, but something like the family he barely remembers having. January settles deeper into the mountains, bringing storms that isolate the cabin in pristine whiteness. Samuel's home becomes a world unto itself, with rhythms and routines that gradually heal something broken in both children. The first time Emma laughs startles everyone, including herself. It happens at breakfast when Scout attempts to sneak bacon from Samuel's plate, and receives a gruff lecture while maintaining perfect innocence in his roamy eyes. The sound bubbles out of Emma unexpectedly, small and rusty like an unused door hinge. She claps her hand over her mouth immediately, but Samuel just winks and slips the bacon to Scout anyway. Mason feels something loosen in his chest, a knot of worry he hadn't realized he was carrying. Each day, Emma ventures further from the frightened silence that enveloped her since her mother's death. She follows Mason as he helps Samuel with chores, solemn-faced but attentive as they chop kindling, check snares, and mend equipment. In the evenings, she sits beside Scout on a braided rug before the fire, her small fingers buried in his graying fur while Samuel tells stories of his and Grandfather Parker's younger days. The old man has a gift for storytelling, his gruff voice softening as he spins tales of mountain adventures, carefully edited for young ears. Some nights, Mason catches Emma watching him across the firelit room with thoughtfulness beyond her years. She's learning to trust again, he realizes, and the responsibility both terrifies and strengthens him. The first snow melt brings new energy to Emma. She follows Mason outside more eagerly, no longer clinging to the cabin's safety. Scout shadows her everywhere, seemingly rejuvenated by his protective role. When Samuel teaches Mason to identify animal tracks in wet spring snow, Emma absorbs every lesson alongside him, her memory for details sometimes sharper than his own. "Mason," she says one evening, using his name directly for the first time instead of simply responding when spoken to. "Can I help with the rabbit snares tomorrow?" The simple question feels monumental. He nods, fighting strange tightness in his throat. "Sure. You've got good eyes. Probably spot the best places." She smiles then, a real smile reaching her eyes, and Mason realizes with sudden clarity that he would face those armed men again without hesitation to protect that smile. That night, when Emma wakes crying from a diminishing nightmare, it's Mason she calls for. He sits beside her bunk, awkwardly patting her shoulder as his grandfather once did for him. "We're safe here," he whispers, knowing it might not be entirely true but believing it in this moment. Emma nods, her breathing steadying. "I know," she says simply. "You brought me to Samuel." The trust in her voice settles on his shoulders, not as a burden now, but as strength he's still learning to recognize. A trusted friend of Samuel's brings news that chills even the veteran. Men claiming to be federal agents are showing Emma's picture in town. The official story claims she was kidnapped by her unstable mother after her father's suicide. Samuel explains to Mason that powerful men are rewriting history, making Emma disappear by changing her story. That night, Mason finds Emma teaching Scout hand signals she invented, her cleverness reminding him that she is not just his responsibility but a person with her own strength. He silently promises the mother he never really knew that he will not let her daughter's story be erased. The messenger arrives at dusk, a weather-beaten man named Hank, who Samuel introduces as his oldest friend and former military spotter. The children are sent to the back room while the men speak, but Mason positions himself near the door crack, listening as he has learned to do since his world turned dangerous. Hank's news spills out between sips of strong coffee, his tone grave as he describes men in dark SUVs with government plates circulating Emma's photograph throughout mountain communities. "They've got a story all worked up," Hank explains. "Say her daddy was some unstable researcher who killed himself after financial troubles. Mother had mental problems, kidnapped the girl in a delusional state. They're framing it as a rescue mission, got local police helping search, everyone thinking they're doing a good deed looking for this poor missing child." Samuel responds with military curses. Perfect cover. Who questions federal agents searching for a kidnapped girl, and if they find her? The silence needs no elaboration. Later, Samuel calls Mason to the kitchen table, where maps are spread beneath kerosene lamplight. "They're rewriting her story, son, making her mother a villain, her father a suicide, erasing the truth so thoroughly that even if Emma were found by good people, they'd hand her right back to the men hunting her." Mason absorbs this seriously. "They can change what people think happened, but not what really did happen," he says. "Emma knows the truth. I know it too." Samuel squeezes his shoulder. "That's why they want her silenced. A child's testimony might be dismissed, but that evidence her mother saved could bring down powerful men. Truth's a stubborn thing, has a way of surfacing even when buried deep. After Samuel retires, Mason finds Emma in their shared room, teaching Scout hand signals she invented. The sight stops him, seeing not a traumatized shadow child, but a person with her own mind and will to survive. He's smart, Emma explains, but old. He forgets sometimes. If we can't talk sometimes, signs might be useful. The practicality of her thinking strikes Mason forcefully. This girl is more than his responsibility, more than a burden. She is Catherine Wilson's daughter, with her own strength and right to justice. As Emma continues teaching Scout, Mason makes a silent promise to her mother. Emma's story will not be erased. Whatever comes next, he realizes he's protecting her not just because he must, but because her truth has become as important to him as his own. A forest ranger named Olivia Harper discovers the children during a patrol near Samuel's property. To everyone's surprise, after hearing their carefully edited story, she offers help instead of questions. Her brother was a journalist who died investigating government corruption, and something in Emma's situation resonates with her. She begins bringing supplies and information about search patterns. Mason remains cautious as his grandfather taught him to be with all adults, but Emma takes to Olivia immediately, finally having a woman to talk to after months surrounded by males. The ranger appears without warning one April morning, as Mason and Emma check Samuel's fishing lines at the creek behind his property. Her uniform emerges from the trees before they can retreat, the Forest Service badge catching sunlight as she approaches. Mason steps protectively in front of Emma despite the woman's friendly expression. "Hello there," she calls, keeping distance as if sensing their wariness. "I'm Ranger Harper. Didn't expect to find children out this way." Samuel doesn't usually have visitors. Mason remains silent, calculating escape options, but Emma steps forward with unexpected confidence, Scout at her heels. "Do you know Samuel?" she asks. The ranger nods, smiling at her directness. "For about 5 years, he helps track wildlife movements in this sector. I'm Olivia. Mind if I ask who you are?" Mason responds with practiced deception. "I'm his grandson. This is my cousin." Though clearly skeptical, Olivia simply suggests they walk back to Samuel's cabin together. The tense journey ends at Samuel's porch, where he watches their approach with carefully concealed concern. After greeting him, Olivia quietly suggests they talk inside. What follows surprises Mason completely. After hearing their edited story, Olivia reveals her brother was an investigative journalist who died in a suspicious accident while investigating illegal mining operations on protected lands. The kind with powerful friends in Washington. The kind that make problems disappear, she explains, studying Emma. "I recognized your face from the alerts. They're saying your mother took you illegally after your father's suicide." Emma responds with fierce certainty. "My daddy was murdered. My mommy tried to save me." Olivia nods simply. "I believe you. Some stories follow patterns if you know what to look for." She warns them about search parties with dogs and thermal imaging equipment moving toward their area next week. In the following weeks, Olivia becomes an unexpected ally, bringing supplies and intelligence about search patterns. Most importantly for Emma, she provides a feminine presence, teaching her about wildflowers and birds while Mason watches with lingering suspicion. "She lost her brother to the same people," Emma explains when Mason questions her trust in the ranger. "She knows what it's like when no one believes the truth." Her simple logic gives Mason pause. Perhaps in this dangerous world, they need to recognize allies alongside enemies. While playing with Scout, Emma mentions Daddy's special stick that her mother always kept hidden. Mason gently helps her remember where it might be, realizing this could be the evidence that cost her parents their lives. Emma retrieves a small USB drive hidden inside her teddy bear, the evidence that could bring down powerful men and potentially clear their names. Samuel examines it on his old laptop but finds it encrypted. The impossible choice looms: attempt to use the evidence or destroy it to keep Emma safe. The revelation comes during a rainy afternoon as Emma sits on the cabin floor with Scout and her teddy bear. "Mommy always kept Daddy's special stick hidden when we were running. Said bad men wanted it really bad, she mentions casually while stroking Scout's muzzle. Mason freezes, exchanging glances with Samuel, whose hands go still above his fishing line. Moving carefully, Mason joins Emma on the floor. "What kind of stick, Em?" he asks neutrally despite his racing heart. Emma shrugs. "Just a little black one. Daddy put his work on it. Mommy sewed it inside Mr. Bear when the bad men first came." Mason remembers Catherine's letter mentioning hidden evidence. "Is Mr. Bear keeping it safe now?" Emma nods, meeting his eyes. "Mommy said not to tell anyone except people helping us. You're helping us." The simple trust weighs heavily on Mason. With Samuel watching, Mason asks, "Do you think Mr. Bear would let us see the special stick? It might help make sure the bad men can't hurt anyone anymore." After serious deliberation, Emma turns the teddy bear over, revealing a nearly invisible seam along its back. Her fingers work the stitching with practiced ease, suggesting she's watched her mother do this before. She withdraws a small black USB drive with TW scratched into its surface. "Thomas Whitaker," Samuel murmurs as Emma places it in Mason's palm. On Samuel's laptop, they discover dozens of encrypted files with names like Pinnacle OP, Water Sample, Site 3, and Hargrove, email thread, redacted. Password prompts block access. "Encrypted," Samuel says grimly. "Smart man, your father, makes the data useless without the right passwords." Emma frowns. Daddy had special words for his computer. Mommy tried to remember them. Later, after Emma sleeps, Samuel speaks quietly. "Even encrypted, this drive is dangerous. Those men won't stop hunting her as long as they believe she has it." Mason understands the impossible choice. Using the evidence means risking exposure. Destroying it means surrendering the truth. Emma's parents died protecting. "What would you do?" he asks. Samuel's eyes grow distant. Sometimes surviving is its own kind of victory, but some truths demand to be told, no matter the cost. Olivia misses a scheduled visit. Instead, armed men surround the cabin at dawn. Samuel creates a diversion while Mason leads Emma through a hidden tunnel the paranoid veteran built years ago. As they emerge into the forest, Mason spots Olivia being held at gunpoint by men in dark suits. Not a traitor, but another victim. The children flee deeper into the wilderness. Mason, now realizing that adults' protection is temporary, and ultimately, he must be the one to keep Emma safe. The first warning comes from Scout, growling at pre-dawn darkness, his aging body tense beside Emma's bed. Mason wakes instantly, recognizing the dog's alarm for human intruders. Samuel appears fully dressed, finger to lips, directing Mason to look outside while he wakes Emma. Through gray light, Mason counts 5 figures in tactical gear moving with military precision around the cabin, carrying short, lethal weapons unlike hunting rifles. Samuel hands Mason a packed backpack. "Remember the tunnel. Take it now. Head northeast toward Blackwater Ridge. Don't stop until dark." Mason hesitates, unwilling to leave. "What about you? And Scout?" Samuel's face softens briefly. "Scout and I will buy you time. Been in worse spots. Your grandfather would be proud of the man you're becoming." A sharp command interrupts their goodbye. "Federal agents, come out with hands visible." Samuel pushes them toward the root cellar, his expression hardening. "Go. Now." The last Mason sees, Samuel is loading his shotgun with Scout beside him, prepared for one final stand. The tunnel is narrow and damp, barely fitting Mason's shoulders. He guides Emma through darkness as explosions and gunfire erupt above. They emerge into dawn, hearing shouting and Scouts barking behind them. Through branches, they spot Olivia kneeling with hands zip-tied, blood on her forehead. A man holds a pistol to her neck, speaking into a radio. "We've got the Ranger. No sign of the children or the drive yet. Wilson is creating problems." "Orders?" Olivia's eyes find Mason's, but instead of revealing them, she deliberately looks away, distracting her captor by attempting to stand. The man forces her down, giving Mason time to pull Emma deeper into the forest. They run desperately along game trails and creek beds until Emma gasps for breath. Resting beneath a fallen cedar, helicopters echo across mountains. What about Samuel? And Scout? And Olivia? Emma asks quietly. Mason has only harsh truth. They helped us get away. Now, we have to help ourselves. Something shifts in that moment. Mason feels his childhood falling away, replaced by terrifying clarity. Adults offer only temporary sanctuary. In this dangerous world, he must keep Emma safe. The responsibility becomes not a burden but a purpose. They will survive. They will use the evidence. They will find someone powerful enough to make the truth matter. Winter deepens, forcing the children to establish a temporary shelter in a cave system Samuel once showed Mason. Survival consumes their days, finding food, staying warm, remaining hidden. Mason teaches Emma what his grandfather taught him, and together they develop skills beyond their years. Their bond strengthens through shared hardship and dependence. One night, half asleep, Emma calls Mason her new family, and the 10-year-old boy feels both terrified and strengthened by the responsibility. The cave entrance, hidden behind winter vines, protects them from elements and searching eyes. Inside, a natural chimney ventilates their small fires. Mason applies skills that once seemed tedious lessons, but now ensure survival, creating a wilderness home as his grandfather taught. Emma proves eager to learn, her city hands growing calloused as she weaves pine branches into sleeping mats, sets rabbit snares, and identifies edible fungi. The USB drive remains hidden in her teddy bear, a constant reminder of why they hide. December, snow blankets the forest, beautiful but dangerous for revealing tracks. They develop careful systems for necessary journeys outside, walking in single file, brushing branches over trails, moving beneath snow-laden trees. During long nights huddled for warmth, Mason tells stories about constellations visible through the chimney, creating continuity in their disrupted lives. Emma's nightmares diminish, though sometimes she still wakes crying for her mother. Mason's comfort becomes more natural with practice. Food grows scarce as winter deepens and animals hibernate. They ration supplies from Samuel, supplement with pine needle tea and occasional trout caught through ice holes. Emma never complains about hunger, instinctively understanding survival requires accepting discomfort. One evening by firelight, Emma watches Mason sewing a torn sleeve. "My daddy couldn't sew," she observes thoughtfully. "Mommy did all the fixing." Mason focuses on his clumsy stitches. "My grandfather taught me. Said a man should know how to mend his own things." After a moment, Emma adds, "You're good at taking care, like Mommy was." The comparison brings unexpected tightness to Mason's throat. Later that night, as the fire dims and temperature drops, Emma murmurs half asleep, "Glad you're my new family." These words weigh heavily on Mason as he stares at stars through the chimney. Family had seemed irrevocably lost with his grandfather's death, existing only in fading memories. Being someone's family terrifies him, yet beneath that fear runs fierce determination. His grandfather said family means having someone to fight for beyond yourself. Looking at Emma, sleeping trustingly beside him, Mason understands this truth more deeply than any 10-year-old should need to. While searching for firewood, Mason discovers an abandoned fire lookout tower. It offers better shelter and a vantage point to spot approaching threats. As they settle in, Emma discovers a cache of supplies left by the previous occupant, including a functional ham radio. Despite having only basic reading skills, Mason sees an opportunity to reach someone who might help them, though his grandfather's warnings about trusting outsiders echo in his mind. The discovery comes during a desperate search for dry wood after days of snow. Mason ventures farther than usual along a wind-swept ridge. The fire tower appears suddenly through a break in trees, weathered frame stark against the white landscape. Mason approaches cautiously, circling twice before climbing the icy metal stairs spiraling up 40 feet. The padlock hangs broken, but the interior remains intact, protected by sturdy construction built for mountain winters. Large windows on all sides offer unobstructed views, a tactical advantage Mason immediately recognizes. Inside contains a narrow cot, desk, and most importantly, a small iron stove with undamaged chimney. Mason returns to their cave with barely contained excitement, describing the tower in detail, emphasizing its visibility advantages. They relocate the next morning, using fresh snow to hide their tracks. Emma brightens at the raised platform with windows bringing light their cave lacked. "It's like a treehouse," she says, a reminder of her youth despite everything they've endured. 3 days later, while Mason checks snares, Emma's exploration reveals a hidden compartment beneath the cot. Inside lies abandoned supplies, the former fire watcher's personal cache, containing canned food, waterproof matches, blankets, paperback westerns, and most importantly, a ham radio with working batteries. Mason regards the equipment with mixed hope and fear. His grandfather had a similar setup for emergency communication with other mountain residents. Mason's limited reading skills make the operator's manual challenging. "Could we call for help?" Emma asks quietly. Mason weighs isolation against their growing needs, especially as Emma's recent cough worries him. That night, after Emma sleeps, Mason powers on the radio at lowest volume, carefully turning through frequencies. A distant voice crackles through static. His finger hovers over the transmission button, the decision monumental for a 10-year-old. Remain silent and continue struggling against winter and illness, or reach out and trust a world that has given them little reason for trust. Watching Emma's labored breathing, Mason understands sometimes survival requires risks his grandfather never prepared him for. After days of trying, Mason makes contact with a journalist named Rebecca Chen. His childish voice initially makes her skeptical, but the details he provides about Emma's father convince her to investigate. She discovers the evidence is authentic, linking high-ranking officials to organized crime. Rebecca offers to help, but warns that meeting her carries enormous risk. Mason must decide if a stranger's promise is worth risking their hard-won safety. The radio becomes Mason's nightly vigil after Emma sleeps, his young voice broadcasting careful messages into static, never revealing their location but seeking someone who might listen. Most nights bring only silence or brief exchanges with hobby operators who lose interest when he refuses to share details. On the 7th night, a woman's voice responds differently. "This is Rebecca Chen, responding to unidentified caller. You mentioned evidence of corruption. Can you elaborate?" Her voice sounds precise, professional, neither dismissive nor eager. Mason hesitates before responding. "My name is Mason. I'm with a girl named Emma Whitaker. Her father was murdered for finding evidence against important people." After a pause, Rebecca asks cautiously, "How old are you, Mason?" The question catches him off guard. "I'm 10. Emma's 6. We've been hiding in the mountains since her mother died, bringing her to me." Disbelief colors Rebecca's response. "Is this some kind of prank?" Mason persists with details from Catherine's letter, names and dates that make Rebecca increasingly serious. Thomas Whitaker was investigating illegal mining operations by Pinnacle Corporation, with connections to Senator Hargrove and Judge Weston. They killed him and then hunted his family. After a long silence, Rebecca's voice transforms, skepticism replaced by focused intensity. "I'm going to ask very specific questions. The answers will tell me if this is legitimate." What follows stretches Mason's memory as Rebecca confirms details. 3 nights later, she reports, "I've verified enough to believe you. Whitaker was investigating exactly what you described. If you truly have evidence, it could expose corruption at the highest levels." Mason glances at Emma's teddy bear. "We have it, but it's password protected." Rebecca offers encryption help, but warns, meeting would be extremely dangerous. These people have resources, connections in law enforcement. They're still actively searching for Emma. The tower has provided sanctuary, but Emma's cough worsens daily. Winter deepens, supplies dwindle. The thought of trusting a stranger terrifies him. "How do I know you're not one of them?" he asks finally. Rebecca answers gently, "You don't. That's the terrible truth. I became a journalist to expose corruption, but I can't promise absolute safety. What I can promise is doing everything in my power to protect you both and make this evidence count." Mason struggles with an impossible decision for a child: continue hiding in the mountains where their food is running out, or risk taking Emma to meet Rebecca. Emma, showing wisdom beyond her 6 years, reminds Mason of something her father used to say: Doing the right thing is never the easy thing. That night, Mason holds the USB drive over their small fire, tempted to destroy it and simply vanish deeper into the wilderness with Emma. Instead, he tucks it away and begins teaching Emma how to act around strangers in preparation for their journey. The weight of responsibility presses on Mason as he inventories their dwindling supplies by lamplight. The canned goods will last another week if strictly rationed. His snares catch less each day as winter deepens. Most concerning is Emma's health, her cough waking her through the night, her face flushed with fever despite extra blankets. Outside, storm clouds gather, threatening snow that would make travel even more treacherous. Rebecca has provided coordinates for a meeting point, a small diner 30 miles away, a 3-day journey if weather permits. The timing must be precise, the approach careful, with contingency plans if anything seems suspicious. Mason paces the tower, his child's body housing adult worries. Emma watches from her blankets, eyes too knowing for her years. "Are you scared?" she asks, voice raspy. Mason nods honestly. Rebecca could be lying. Someone could follow us. The weather could turn bad. Emma considers this with serious contemplation. "My daddy used to say that doing the right thing is never the easy thing. That's why bad people choose easy." This simple wisdom, a father's legacy in his daughter's memory, catches Mason off guard. "What do you think is right?" he asks, genuinely seeking her opinion. Emma touches the teddy bear where the drive is hidden. "Daddy died getting this, Mommy too. They thought it was important enough." Her uncomplicated logic cuts through Mason's tangled thoughts. That night, after Emma sleeps, Mason holds the USB drive over the fire. The temptation to destroy their burden pulls at him. With the evidence gone, perhaps they could disappear into the wilderness, away from the corruption hunting them. Yet something stops his hand. Perhaps Emma's words, her mother's dying request, or his recognition that running merely postpones an inevitable reckoning. He returns the drive to its hiding place and begins planning their journey. The following days, Mason teaches Emma how to respond to strangers, which questions to avoid answering truthfully, how to disappear in crowds, how to appear unremarkable. Like a game of pretend, he explains. "Except the rules keep you safe." The children leave the mountain's protection, making their way toward the small town where Rebecca waits. Dawn breaks clear and cold as they begin the long descent, the air burning their lungs with each breath. Mason constantly checks landmarks against Rebecca's radio instructions, worried about Emma's strength with her lingering cough from their weeks in the damp lookout tower. The wilderness transforms as they move downward, human presence growing more evident in discarded beer cans, weathered hunting blinds, and distant vehicle sounds. By mid-afternoon, they reach a county highway they must cross. Mason studying the traffic flow from behind juniper bushes while Emma clutches her teddy bear, the one possession she refused to leave behind. They time their crossing between cars, walking casually, though every instinct screams to run across the exposed asphalt. The second day brings them within 5 miles of town, close enough that houses appear through trees and dogs bark in distant yards. Disaster nearly strikes when a Forest Service truck appears on a maintenance road just as they prepare to cross. Mason pulls Emma behind a fallen log, but realizes the vehicle will pass directly by their hiding spot. Before he can formulate a plan, Emma squeezes his hand and darts toward the road, her movements deliberately unsteady. The truck slows as the driver spots her, a uniformed ranger leaning out with concern. Emma rubs her eyes as if crying, pointing vaguely opposite from their actual path. While the ranger kneels to her level, completely captured by the apparently lost child, Mason circles through dense underbrush to their emergency meeting point. 20 agonizing minutes pass before Emma appears, explaining how she convinced the ranger she was camping with her father and got lost looking for firewood. He drove her to a campground up the road, and she waited until he left before running to meet Mason. That night, sheltered beneath a rock overhang as close to town as they dare camp, Mason watches Emma arrange their sleeping space with practiced efficiency, setting barriers to block their small fire from view and organizing their remaining food without prompting. When he awkwardly compliments her quick thinking, she accepts with a serious nod beyond her years, simply stating, "We protect each other." Mason realizes they have become something his grandfather never prepared him for, something beyond reluctant guardian and frightened charge. They have become partners, bound by shared danger and mutual dependence, each contributing what the other lacks. Tomorrow they will reach the town where Rebecca waits, where adult promises will again shape their fate. But tonight, Mason recognizes that whatever comes next, they face it not as protector and protected, but as equals in the dangerous world they navigate together. They reach the meeting point, a small church on the outskirts of town. Rebecca is waiting, but so are men in black SUVs. In the chaos that follows, Mason manages to pass the USB drive to Rebecca but becomes separated from Emma. When he finds her being dragged toward a vehicle, the 10-year-old boy attacks with desperate courage, surprising the adult long enough for Emma to break free. Both children escape into the night, Mason bleeding from a grazing wound to his arm, Emma now leading him through unfamiliar streets. The church stands silhouetted against the late afternoon sky, its white steeple rising above surrounding pines. Mason and Emma observe from trees behind the cemetery, studying the scene with practiced caution. Rebecca waits on the steps, posture alert as she occasionally checks her watch. Only her sedan occupies the parking lot, positioned for quick exit as planned. It looks right, Mason whispers. Remember, we approach from behind, not across open ground. They move through the cemetery using gravestones as cover, staying low. When 30 yards from the church, 2 black SUVs with tinted windows turn into the driveway, moving with predatory deliberation. Mason pulls Emma behind a stone angel, mind racing through contingency plans that suddenly seem inadequate. Rebecca notices the vehicles, her posture changing subtly, hand slipping into her coat pocket. Men in dark suits emerge, one approaching Rebecca while others spread out, searching with trained efficiency. They knew, Mason whispers, sick realization dawning. Someone knew we were meeting. Rebecca's conversation with the lead man grows visibly tense. Mason makes a split-second decision against every survival instinct. Stay here. If I don't return in 5 minutes, run toward town. He slips away using shadows and gravestones as cover, entering through the church's side door. Inside, Mason sees Rebecca surrounded by men, hands slightly raised. A hand suddenly covers his mouth from behind, but it's Rebecca, pulling him into a storage closet. They've been tracking me. We need the drive now. Mason gives her the USB drive. Emma's still hiding. I need to get her. Circling back, he finds Emma's hiding place empty. Panic rises as he spots a man dragging her toward the SUVs. Without thinking, Mason charges, attacking with desperate intensity that momentarily breaks the man's grip. Pain explodes in Mason's arm, but Emma is already free, pulling him after her. They sprint into darkness, Emma guiding them through unfamiliar streets, her city instincts taking over where his wilderness knowledge ends. Blood soaks his sleeve with each painful step. Rebecca? Emma gasps behind a dumpster. Mason shakes his head, uncertain if the journalist escaped or if their months of hardship accomplished anything. One certainty remains. They're still together, still fighting for what matters most. Emma guides them to a homeless encampment beneath a highway overpass, something she remembers from her time on the run with her mother. An older veteran named Wilson recognizes something in Mason's determined eyes and helps bandage his wound without questions. As Mason struggles to stay conscious, Emma remains by his side, using skills Samuel taught her to care for his injury. Through his pain, Mason hears her whispered promise, "You're my family now. Don't leave me alone." The world blurs as Mason follows Emma through darkened streets, wounded arm pressed against his body, blood seeping between his fingers despite pressure. Each heartbeat sends fresh pain radiating from the injury. Emma navigates with surprising confidence through the unfamiliar town. "My mother brought me here once, when we first ran. She said cities have hiding places if you know where to look." The concrete underpass looms ahead, highway traffic rumbling overhead like thunder. Beneath this man-made cave, tents and makeshift shelters, house societies marginalized. "People here don't ask questions," Emma whispers. "Mommy said nobody looks for you where nobody wants to look." Mason's trained eye recognizes the organization within apparent chaos. Territories marked by subtle boundaries, the watchers positioned at key points tracking their approach. Emma leads them toward shelters apart from the main encampment, approaching an older man sitting beside a propane heater, posture military straight despite his surroundings. "Excuse me," she says, voice deliberately small and vulnerable. "My brother's hurt. Can you help us?" The man's sharp eyes beneath bushy white brows assess them comprehensively, lingering on Mason's blood-soaked sleeve before meeting his eyes directly, silent recognition passing between them. "Name's Wilson. Army medic, once upon a time. Let's see that arm, son." Mason collapses onto a milk crate as adrenaline ebbs, leaving only pain and exhaustion. Wilson examines the wound with clinical efficiency. Bullet graze, nasty, but not life-threatening if cleaned properly. When pain threatens to pull Mason into darkness during treatment, Emma's small hands steady his shoulders, her voice guiding his breathing as Samuel taught them. Wilson offers them a private corner in his shelter with clean sleeping bags. As consciousness fades, Mason feels Emma settle beside him, her hand finding his uninjured one. "You're my family now," she whispers. "Don't leave me alone." He squeezes her hand once in response, a wordless assurance transcending his fading awareness. Mason recovers to news that Rebecca has published the evidence. National headlines expose the corruption, and arrests have begun. Rebecca finds the children, explaining that Emma's testimony could help ensure justice. The 10-year-old boy is torn between keeping Emma hidden and helping her finish what her parents started. When Emma says firmly, "My daddy was brave. I want to be brave too," Mason realizes that protecting her means supporting her choice, not just her safety. Fever claims the next 2 days, Mason drifting between consciousness and disjointed dreams, where he runs endlessly through forests that transform into city streets, pursued by faceless men. When clarity finally returns, he wakes to find Emma and Wilson studying a newspaper spread across a makeshift table, their expressions intense with concentration. Emma notices his movement immediately, abandoning the paper to kneel beside him, her small hand testing his forehead with the seriousness of a physician. "The fever broke last night," she informs him, relief evident in her voice. Wilson says that's good. Mason struggles to sit up, his wounded arm stiff but less painful than he remembers. The shelter around them remains secure, Wilson's organized space, a haven within the larger encampment. "How long?" he asks, his voice rough from disuse. 3 days, Wilson answers, folding the newspaper deliberately before bringing Mason a bottle of water. "You needed the rest. Wounds clean, no infection." Mason drinks gratefully, his mind clearing with each swallow. "There's news," Emma says, unable to contain her excitement any longer. She retrieves the newspaper, opening it to the front page where bold headlines proclaim, "Federal prosecutor's evidence exposes corruption ring," and "Senator Hargrove, Judge Weston among officials arrested in sweeping investigation." Below these headlines, a smaller article reads, "Whistleblower Thomas Whitaker vindicated. Death investigation reopened." Mason reads slowly, his limited education making the dense text challenging, but the essential facts emerge clearly. Rebecca Chen's publication of Thomas Whitaker's evidence has triggered a federal investigation, resulting in arrests of high-ranking officials connected to illegal mining operations and environmental crimes. Most significantly, the official narrative of Thomas Whitaker's suicide and his wife's mental instability has been publicly questioned, the truth of their murder and persecution gaining credibility in official circles. "She did it," Mason whispers, the realization settling like a physical weight being lifted. "She got the evidence out." Wilson studies him with knowing eyes that ask no questions but seem to understand the magnitude of what these children have endured. "There's more," he says quietly. "Someone's been looking for you." "Woman named Chen," asked around carefully, showed credentials to some of the veterans down here. Said it was about protecting witnesses, not finding fugitives. Mason tenses instinctively, wariness so deeply ingrained that even good news triggers defensive preparation. Wilson raises a calming hand. "I checked her out my way. Got contact still. From before. She's legitimate." working with federal prosecutors now. I told her I'd ask if you wanted contact, nothing more. The decision looms before Mason, complex beyond his years, yet familiar in its weight of responsibility. Staying hidden means continued safety, but leaves Emma's parents' story incomplete, their killers potentially escaping full justice without her testimony. Emerging means risk, but also the possibility of resolution, of Emma reclaiming her identity and her history. Before he can speak, Emma's voice breaks the silence, her tone holding a certainty beyond her 6 years. I want to talk to her. She meets Mason's surprised gaze without wavering. My daddy was brave. He got the evidence even though it was dangerous. My mommy was brave. She kept me safe even when she was hurt. I want to be brave too. Mason studies her face, seeing not just the frightened girl he's protected these many months, but the person she's becoming, shaped by loss yet undimmed by it. He remembers his grandfather's lessons about courage, about doing what's necessary despite fear rather than in its absence. Are you sure? He asks, respecting her decision rather than simply making it for her. Emma nods, her small fingers unconsciously touching the teddy bear that once held the evidence that has changed everything. I remember things they need to know. About the men who came to our house. About what my daddy told me before they came. Her voice drops slightly. But only if you come too. I'm still scared. The simple admission of fear alongside determination strikes Mason with unexpected force. His protection of Emma has evolved from physical safety to something more complex. The recognition that true protection means supporting her choices, not just shielding her from consequences. We'll do it together, he decides, the words feeling right as they leave his mouth. But we make Rebecca come to us first. We make sure it's safe. Wilson nods approval at the cautious approach, already moving to arrange the meeting through channels he trusts. As preparations begin, Mason watches Emma carefully folding the newspaper article about her father. Her movements deliberate and reverent, preserving this tangible evidence that her parents' truth is finally being told. He realizes that protection has many forms, and sometimes the bravest is allowing someone the freedom to reclaim their own story, even when that path leads away from the safety of shadows. Protected by federal marshals Rebecca trusts, Emma gives her testimony. Mason never leaves her side, his presence giving her courage to recount the horrors she witnessed. When an attempt is made to silence her during the proceedings, it's Mason who notices the threat first, alerting the marshals. The would-be assassin is captured, the last desperate act of a crumbling conspiracy. For the first time, Mason feels that their hunters have become the hunted. The federal building rises like a fortress of glass and stone, its security checkpoints and uniformed personnel a stark contrast to the wilderness that has been their sanctuary for so long. Mason and Emma pass through metal detectors and security screening, her small hand gripping his with nervous intensity. Rebecca walks ahead of them, her professional demeanor masking the protective watchfulness that hasn't diminished since their careful reunion 3 days ago. 2 federal marshals flank them, their presence both reassuring and unsettling to children accustomed to viewing all authority with suspicion. The conference room where Emma will give her deposition feels deliberately designed to minimize intimidation, with comfortable chairs and a table lower than standard height. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Martinez with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, explains the process in terms Emma can understand, emphasizing that she can stop at any time, that there are no wrong answers, that her only job is to tell what she remembers. Mason sits beside Emma throughout, close enough that their shoulders touch, a physical reminder of his presence. When the recording equipment is activated and the formal questioning begins, Emma's voice emerges small but steady, growing stronger as she speaks. She recounts the night men came to their home, describes her father's desperate efforts to gather his research, her mother's quick actions to hide her in a closet where she could see but not be seen. The details she provides carry the unmistakable authenticity of a child's perspective, focused on specifics adults might overlook, remembering conversations not meant for her ears but absorbed nonetheless. The tall man with the scar called my daddy by his first name, she explains. He said, "Tom, you should have stayed with the program instead of playing hero." Daddy said he couldn't ignore what they were doing to the water, to the people getting sick in the valley. Her testimony continues for hours, with breaks when her energy flags or when particular memories prove too difficult. Through it all, Mason remains her constant, offering silent support, occasionally squeezing her hand when her voice wavers, his presence an anchor in the unfamiliar process. During the afternoon session, as Emma describes the weeks on the run with her mother, Mason's attention drifts to the large windows overlooking the plaza below. A movement catches his eye, something out of rhythm with the normal pedestrian flow. A figure moving with too much purpose, too direct a path toward the building entrance. The man's hand reaches inside his jacket in a motion Mason recognizes from his grandfather's warnings about concealed weapons. Without conscious thought, Mason's hand shoots up, interrupting Emma mid-sentence. "The window," he says sharply, pointing toward the plaza. "That man's got a gun." The marshals react with professional speed, one immediately moving to shield Emma, while the other alerts security through his radio. The room erupts in controlled chaos as additional agents flood in, securing doors and moving everyone away from windows. Outside, the would-be assassin is tackled by security personnel who materialize seemingly from nowhere, his weapon clattering across concrete before he can use it. Later, in the safe house where they've been moved as a precaution, Rebecca explains that the man was connected to Judge Weston, a last desperate attempt to silence testimony that would ensure maximum sentences for those already arrested. "You potentially saved lives today, Mason," she tells him, her expression serious. "How did you spot him when trained agents didn't?" Mason shrugs, uncomfortable with the praise. "My grandfather taught me to watch for things that don't fit." He moved wrong, too focused. The words sound inadequate to explain the instincts honed through months of survival, the hypervigilance that has kept them alive. That night, as federal marshals maintain watch outside their room, Emma sits cross-legged on her bed, her face thoughtful in the dim light. "They're afraid of us now," she observes, the realization seeming to surprise her. "The bad men. They're running from us instead of us running from them." Mason considers this shift, this inversion of the power dynamic that has defined their existence for so long. "Not afraid of us," he corrects gently, "afraid of the truth. What you told today makes it real for everyone, not just us." Emma nods slowly, processing this distinction. "Is it over now?" she asks, the question containing all the longing for normalcy that children their age should take for granted. Mason wishes he could offer absolute certainty, but months of harsh reality have taught him the value of honest answers. "Not completely," he admits, "but we're not alone anymore. And they can't hide now that everyone knows what they did." This partial reassurance seems to satisfy Emma, who settles under her blankets with the teddy bear that has shared their entire journey. Mason remains awake longer, watching the play of security lights through the window blinds, marveling at the strange reversal. For months they've been prey, running before predators with seemingly unlimited resources. Now, for the first time, he feels the sensation of those same powerful forces aligned in their protection rather than their pursuit. The hunters have indeed become the hunted. 6 months later, the children return to the mountains with Samuel, who survived his encounter with the men who came for them. His cabin has been rebuilt with help from the community that rallied around Emma's story. Olivia, who had been forced to cooperate when her family was threatened, joins their small celebration. Emma, now legally under Samuel's guardianship with Mason as her brother, plants flowers by the cabin while Scout watches over her. That night, as Emma sleeps safely, 10-year-old Mason sits on the porch with Samuel, looking at the stars. The old veteran tells him his grandfather would be proud of the man he's becoming, though Mason insists he's still just a kid. Samuel smiles and says sometimes the bravest men are boys who stand tall when the world expects them to break. The mountain air carries the scent of pine and fresh-cut timber as their truck navigates the familiar winding road. Mason watches the wilderness unfold through the window, the landscape simultaneously strange and familiar after months away. Beside him, Emma presses her face to the glass, her expression brightening as they pass landmarks she recognizes from their journey. In the driver's seat, Samuel navigates with the confidence of someone returning home, his weathered face bearing new scars, but his eyes clear and forward-facing. The clearing appears around the final bend, sunlight illuminating what once was and what has been rebuilt. Samuel's cabin stands whole again, its logs fresh cut, but arranged in the same pattern he designed decades earlier. Surrounding it, evidence of community effort remains in stacked lumber, tools still waiting to be returned to their owners, the newly installed solar panels that Rebecca arranged through a veterans support organization. Scout emerges from the porch at their arrival, moving slower after his injuries but tail wagging with unmistakable joy as Emma tumbles from the truck to meet him. The dog's loyalty during the raid saved Samuel's life, placing himself between his master and the men who came with weapons, and leaving the veteran time to reach his shotgun. The reunion fills the clearing with a simple joy that seemed impossible during their months of running, of testifying, of rebuilding their lives through the complex legal proceedings that followed Emma's testimony. The corruption case has become one of the largest environmental crime prosecutions in the country's history, with sentences still being determined for the highest-ranking officials involved. Senator Hargrove faces decades in prison. Judge Weston died by suicide before his trial could begin. Thomas and Catherine Whitaker have been publicly exonerated, their memory honored rather than tarnished by false narratives. Olivia arrives an hour later, her Forest Service truck announcing her approach before she appears. Her reunion with the children carries the weight of complicated history, her forced cooperation with those hunting them still a source of visible guilt despite their forgiveness. "They had my sister," she explains again, though they've assured her understanding many times. "They showed me photos of men watching her children at school." The shared meal on Samuel's new porch marks not an ending, but a transition, a deliberate choice to create something new from the ashes of what was destroyed. The legal proceedings granted Samuel guardianship of both children, their unusual family configuration supported by federal authorities who recognized the bond forged through shared survival. Emma plants wildflowers along the cabin's perimeter, while Mason helps Samuel install the last of the new windows. Scout supervises from his sunny spot, his vigilance now relaxed but never entirely abandoned. When darkness falls and Emma finally succumbs to sleep in the small room the community built especially for her, Mason joins Samuel on the porch. The night sky spreads above them, stars brilliant in the clear mountain air. The same constellations Mason once used to navigate their escape now simply beautiful rather than functional. "Your grandfather would be proud," Samuel says quietly, the words carrying no platitude but simple truth. "The man you're becoming." Mason shakes his head, suddenly self-conscious. "Still, just a kid." Samuel's laugh holds no mockery, only understanding. "Sometimes," he says, "the bravest men are boys who stand tall when the world expects them to break." The wisdom resonates with something deep in Mason's experience, something he feels but lacks words to express. He thinks of Emma sleeping safely inside, of the long journey from frightened children to something stronger than mere survivors. Family isn't about who shares your blood, but who stands beside you when the darkness closes in. The fire crackles in the stone hearth Samuel built with his own hands, its light spilling through the cabin windows onto the porch where they sit. Mason leans back in his chair, allowing himself to feel something that has been absent for longer than he can remember, something that resembles peace. The mountain night wraps around them like a blanket, familiar and welcoming. They are home,